Welcome to Chapter 5. In this chapter, we're going to discuss our relations and retention both with the individual as well as the organization. Various things that you should be able to do by the time you're done reading this chapter is know the 4 different views of motivation at work, the nature of the psychological contract, the difference between job satisfaction and engagement, identify a system for controlling absenteeism, describe the different kinds of turnover and how it can be measured, and summarize the ways that we can retain our employees. There are various factors that are tied to performance of workers. We're looking at the ability of a person to do the job, how much effort they expend, and what support they receive from the organization. Those things are multiplied together in order to then give you the calculation of performance. Here's a visual of that. You can see the effort that's expended is our motivation, attendance, job design. That factors into performance. Our talents, interests, and personality factors are our individual ability. That's factored in. And then what support we receive from management, coworkers, the use of equipment and technology, any training and development, any standards that are set are factored in. How we're motivated, it's literally what comes from within. What's going to cause us to act positively, to engage, to invest in the organization. And we have to look at the various approaches. Need theory is stating basically as long as our basic needs are met adequately, then we'll give you what you need in return. But if they're not, then we're going to basically give you the basic, the bare minimum. We're not going to try to give you above and beyond. We're not going to stay later. We're not going to volunteer to do anything. We're going to do the basic job description and possibly not even do the part that says and other duties as assigned. It may be that even the other duties as assigned, we're going to do the basic bare minimum. Under 2-factor theory, it's looking at both hygiene factors that can cause dissatisfaction within work, and we're looking at what group factors that account for our individual motivation. And on this other slide, we'll see coming up, we'll see a visual of that. Under equity theory, we want to be treated fairly at work. That's a basic common denominator amongst all of us. And we look at the fairness of what others receive versus us, and based on that, we determine equity. If it's fair, if it seems like we're all, receiving the same, then it's equitable. If not, then we have issues. Under expectancy, we're looking at what we expect to receive from the company and how we expect to be treated. And in that, we based how we behave. So if we're being yelled at, if we're being abused, then we may behave in a negative way. If we feel that we're being unfairly treated, we may perform lower. We may behave negatively. We may. So it really goes based on what we're expecting versus how we're treated. That then determines our behavior. Here's the visual of the two when you compare them. This entire pyramid you guys have seen as far as Maslow's hierarchy of needs, starting with the basic physiological needs all the way up to self-actualization. And under the 2-factor theory, it's looking at the top 2 of self-actualization and esteem from ourselves and others. And then we can look at the various motivators. The bottom 3 areas are all factored into our hygiene in salary, interpersonal relationships, the working conditions are all coming from these 3 categories. How we understand motivation. We look at inputs and outcomes, or outputs, however you want to look at it. What we bring to the organization is our input. How we are rewarded in exchange for those inputs are the outcomes. And when we view the value as fairly distributed, then we can see our relationship between the performance that we provide and how satisfied we are with the job that we are doing, but also with the company in which we're employed. Under expectancy theory, Porter and Lawler suggested that we base our decisions about our behaviors on expectations of desired outcomes, and that relationship can impact um, both the effort that we put in and the performance that come out, as well as the linkage between the performance and how we're rewarded and the value of those rewards and the various degrees in which they're provided to us. They simplify this using a diagram so that you can visually see how those are all factored in. And you can see that the cycle just keeps repeating. We have top motivators and other motivators. Really, we would all accept lower pay as long as we're being appreciated, respected, and we're able to use our full personal capabilities in the workforce. You can be paid a lot of money and be and not have those three, and you'll quit a job. You see the relationship? Some other motivators are then having good management leadership, getting the feedback and benefits and training, employment security and pay, and getting little doodads and videos, t-shirts, things of that nature. Those are other factors, but those top three are so valuable. You could literally walk away from a high-paying job because you're not appreciated, you're not respected, and you can't use your full capabilities. When we look at the relationships, we have a psychological contract um, that binds us with each other within the company. Um, the satisfaction on the job, our commitment to the job as well as to the company, our level of engagement, and our loyalty to the company. When we factor in the performance and expectations, they funnel into the results. Um, if we are highly satisfied and the organization meets our needs, um, it it then rolls into most likely higher performance. A person is loyal when they're being treated fairly, when they're being treated with respect. Um, the added bonus is if they're being paid adequately. They'll stay. People have stayed for companies 20, 30, 50 years um, based on these factors. Our psychological contract is unwritten. It is something that really just establishes the relationship and the nature of the work and how we expect to work together as a team and the priority based on the organization's needs versus our own. We have an expectation that the company will provide a competitive compensation and benefits. There will be a flexibility between our work home balance and opportunities for career development within the organization, but also providing us the development needed that if we were ever to leave the organization, we would be properly suitable for another company. With that contract, we would then contribute our skill improvement and increased productivity, reasonable time within the organization, right? We're not going to quit after a year, and extra efforts and results when needed. When we look at our global perspective, we have to be mindful that we have to have individual contracts with um, employees from different cultures. When we're in several countries, we have to be mindful that the expectations and understandings here in the US may not be the same in another country. And so we have to set those expectations clearly there. Us being satisfied is when we're feeling positive. Their evaluations that we give back are positive. The morale is high. Our surveys that should be able to measure attitude would focus on how we feel and believe about our jobs, the organization, our managers, our coworkers. A lot of companies don't do attitude surveys, and it's really a disservice because then you really don't know how your employees feel. There's a catch 22 because some employees are fearful of doing surveys because they feel as though there could be negative repercussions if they say anything bad about the company or their manager. So those surveys should be truly anonymous, where it's not tied back to an IP address, an email address, or anything of the sort that can identify the employee. There are some components that we have to look at. How our coworkers engage with us, the nature of the work that we perform, how we're supervised, whom we're supervised by, how well we can advance in the organization, and how adequate our pay is, all factor into satisfaction on the workplace. We have a commitment and engagement level that we have to consider. How much do we really believe that our company is going to do what it says and provide us with what we need? Those are um, that right there then lets you know how committed we are to not only doing the work at the company but remaining with the company. If we believe it, we accept it that this company is going to do and provide all that they say they will, then we stay. If not, we leave. And the extent to where we're engaged, whether we're doing the bare minimum or we're going above and beyond, is based on our thoughts and behaviors, on the work that we do, how we're supported or not by management. And so that is how you can tell if you have an employee who seems like they're spaced out most of the day, they're not doing their work. If they're doing it, it's not on time, it's not good quality, they're highly disengaged. And so all of that then will factor into loyalty, how faithful you're going to be to an institution or to an employer, right? Is all of those are all tied in. We have engaged and disengaged employees, as I said, and of course there's various degrees from low to high. If you're very active and busy, you're fully invested in your job, you're very involved in the work that you're doing, you put in extra effort, you willing to, come in early, stay late, you're engaged, and most likely you're highly engaged. If you only react to pay, you're doing only the basics, you're not giving your best effort, you're just putting in time, you're here from 9 to 5, so you're going to be there 9 to 5, then you're disengaged. And at some degree, you may be highly disengaged. And a highly disengaged worker needs to be dismissed from their job. You need to actually intervene before they get to that point. The moment you start to notice the disengagement, you need to do an intervention. Because by the time they're highly disengaged, they're also negatively impacting your other employees, right? They may be adding to your turnover rate. So there's a level of citizenship that should be established in an organization that is deemed as part of the job. It helps to lead to a more desirable workplace. There is greater recognition, appreciation, and gratitude from employees because it creates a social pact. It's an energy. It's part of the culture of the organization that helps to improve well-being and the social interactions within the organization. Absenteeism is anytime you're not at work on time or you don't stay as long as you're supposed to. And so you can be involuntary or voluntary. When we look at direct and indirect cost, indirect are all the things in green, having to pay for replacement training, your dissatisfaction of customers over time when the workplace slows up. Work pace, not place. When there's overstaffing to cover anticipated absences. Then you have your direct costs. Those are that you know for a fact that you're having to pay for the absent worker. You're having to pay for any salary or benefits for the absent worker. So there's your indirect and direct cost. When we address absenteeism, there are some different ways in which we can do so. Disciplinary approach is the first time they're absent, um, they receive an oral warning. After that, it's written warning, suspension, and then finally you're dismissed. You're terminated from the company. Positive reinforcement can be giving rewards for meeting those attendance standards. So a person who is for the quarter or for the month or whatever, or for the year, that they've, only missed one day of work or never missed work or whatever, that they're now rewarded some way. There's a combination approach where you can reward the desired behaviors while also punishing the undesired ones. A no fault policy where employees can manage their own attendance as long as they don't abuse it. PTO programs where they can use days from their accounts at their discretion from an account. And we can measure absenteeism using this formula. We take the number of employees, and from there you deduct the days that are lost through absence during a specific period. That is divided by the average number of employees times the number of work days. And from that number, you multiply it by 100. This is the formula the Department of Labor suggests you use. Some other measures is using incident rate, inactivity rate, and severity rate, which is basically breaks down to the number of absences by per 100 employees for a day, the percentage of time lost due to absenteeism, and the average time lost per absent employee during a specific period of time. We look at turnover. This is any time an organization, an employee, has to leave, whether voluntarily or involuntarily. How you can see when there's a possible turnover about to take place. A person's motivation is low, their interest in getting promoted is low, they're really not trying to be involved in anything that's going to have them engaged long term. They really don't contribute much to meetings. They're basically doing the bare minimum. You are about to have a turnover. You need to intervene. We have different types of turnover. Involuntary is because they were laid off, they violated work rule, they were a low performer, they were fired. Voluntary, they quit. Functional is when you have a disruptive employee or a lower performing employee that leaves. Dysfunctional, this is when you have a high performer or a key individual, that could be a CEO, when they leave at critical times. Those are dysfunctional because they cause chaos, because they're not quickly replaceable. Uncontrollable turnover is when an employee leaves and the employer has no control over it. That could be death, that could be deployment from military, and other number of things. Controllable turnover is basically it's been influenced by the employer. That's why you have to leave. Churn. Some of you in HR use this term, you understand this term. This is anytime you hire new workers while you're laying off other ones. And this can cause issues because sometimes your skill level of the new workers are not up to par as your established workers that you're laying off. This also can cause a lot of grief and cause low morale in the company because employees aren't sure who's being laid off and when. How we compute turnover rate. We take the number of employees that are separating from the company during the year. That's divided by the total number of employees that we have at mid-year. That number is then multiplied by 100, and we have various categories that we use that we analyze, looking at the specific job, the job level within the organization, what department, unit, and location they're from, why they're leaving, and how long they were with the company, various demographics that we take in consideration based on race, gender, so on and so forth. If they're military, we can look at their level of education, how much training they received, what knowledge they had, what skills and abilities, and then where their performance ratings or levels were. And using all of that information, you get a really good specific picture as to each individual that left your company. Then we have to look at how all of this, what this cost us. We have our hidden and indirect costs, the training, replacement, vacancy, and separation costs. Vacancy costs are tied to any time that position is not filled. And literally what happens is that you're having to pay, you're losing money because you need a body there to do the work, but there's not one there to do so. When we look at these costs, here's a visual of all of that. So, optimal turnover is how we calculate the turnover cost and those benefits separately. And more turnover in certain segments can be beneficial if it will cost you little to nothing. If the people that are leaving are less valuable than those that you're replacing. If you're replacing them with someone that's more skilled and brings more to the table, then there's not your loss is low. And knowing that good replacements are available. There's various myths about retention that that have been circulating around, that it has little, the hiring has little to do with it, that money is the main reason why people leave, that you shouldn't be concerned about retention during change over, that if you train people, you're only training them for another employer. And then, of course, if you have a high performer and they want to leave, that you can't hold them. Then we look at the drivers and how they factor in training and development, rewards, organizational management factors, the work life balance, policies and practices by the employer. Those all factor into retention. How we can go about retaining. If we make our job assignments challenging, not slave labor, but challenging, that it motivates people to use all their skill sets, that we provide regular feedback, not just not just quarterly or semi-annually or annually, but regularly. Come up with different competencies for management and making sure that we actually create mentoring availabilities and opportunities. We use various assessments and metrics such as supervision, departments, demographics of those leaving and staying. All of this information is analyzed for retention. When you can then see all of this, you can see how best you can retain employees and where. Now, here's a visual of the measurement and assessment, how that factors into interventions and evaluation and follow-up. So we use the employee surveys to diagnose specific problem areas, see where employees need certain things or where they prefer. We can look at which HR activities are well received or not, evaluate in the attitudes of our employees and see how satisfied they are. And in the exit interview, this is how you'll actually find out why an employee is leaving. It doesn't harm them to say, I'm leaving because Joe was abusive, right? I'm leaving because, you guys wouldn't give me a raise in 5 years. And I can't live with this salary. I had to turn around and get two part-time jobs, and I'm exhausted, and I'm sick all the time. Things like that are helpful. You also need to do evaluations for the first year turnover, and that way you're focusing on those first year employees, because turnover is usually highest within that first year of them being hired. And you need to then be able to reevaluate how you're recruiting people, whether or not your job previews are realistic, because if they're not, then that could factor into why you're getting people in, but you're not being able to keep them because you're selling a pipe dream. Then you can see how it can lead to future career development within and outside of the organization, and as well as to higher performance. Then at that point, you need to do a follow-up to your evaluation where you can track intervention results, and those efforts need to be adjusted accordingly. And you can also create a pilot program that you roll out to a smaller segment within your organization, see how it affects retention before you then extend it throughout the entire organization. With that, that is the end of chapter 5. If you have any questions, you know how to reach me. Thank you.